Topping the news this hour, well, they've done it again. In literally an 11th hour deal, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a fiscal cliff budget deal that President Obama is expected to sign into law. So that's that. Crisis averted. Cue the confetti, right? Well, actually not even close. The U.S. might have avoided an economic calamity in the short run, but the future of the country is still as uncertain as it was before, if not even more so. Let's take a look at the scorecard. Did the U.S. meet its fiscal cliff deadline of midnight December 31st to avoid financial repercussions? Nope. Despite the fact that Congress had almost a year to act, it missed its deadline by a day. Luckily, stock markets were closed on New Year's and are doing quite well today as a result of the newly signed deal. And then there's the whole retroactive agreement thing, meaning that Congress can decide it didn't, in fact, go over the fiscal cliff when the truth is that technically it did. So what about the automatic spending cuts known as sequestration, or the crux of the crisis? No, a final decision on how much to cut and where to cut from has been delayed only by a couple of months. What's more, sequestration could be even harsher on military programs if a deficit and debt agreement are not reached between Congress and the White House by this new deadline. So did the deal raise the desired amount of revenue to please both Republicans and Democrats? A big fat no on that one, and President Obama had to reel back on his campaign promise to raise taxes on all people making $250,000 or more. Did the cliff deal put the U.S. on a long-term path to decrease the deficit, as was the plan? Not even close. In fact, President Obama spoke in very harsh words to Congress last night about paying its bills on time. Did it avoid a tax increase on the employed? Not really. It might have raised only taxes on the people making $450,000 or more, but it did not address the payroll tax increases at all, meaning that 77% of Americans will be paying more in federal taxes come 2013. And if you make about $50,000 a year, just for an example, you can expect to see your taxes increase by about $1,000. So despite the fact that Congress is breathing a sigh of relief today, things are as desperate as ever. The U.S. could still end up going over the fiscal cliff after all. So to talk more about this and more was Max Stroud-Wolf, senior analyst at Greencrest Capital and professor at the New School. He joined me earlier and started off by talking about the successes and failures on Congress's part.
I think I would liken it in the following. Congress took the U.S. government and the U.S. economy hostage. Then they let their hostage go about an hour, several hours after the hostage deadline, and they now would like to be congratulated for letting their hostages go. However, since they took the hostages, it's hard to be excited. In addition to which, this has reputationally damaged the United States, as well as really damaged the United States, because all the uncertainty and all the negativity over the last really 10 months almost as this dragged out, and particularly over the last 6 weeks, have subdued the level of economic activity below where it would have been. Is this the worst case scenario? No. Is there anything here to congratulate on yourself on, really, the way Congress has? Not unless you live in the parallel universe that seems to house most of our senior political leadership.
So, Max, let's talk about the winners and losers here. Who do you see as the biggest winners of last night and the biggest losers?
Well, certainly bigger winners on some level are folks who make between $250,000 and $400,000 or $450,000 as a family. I'm not sure that's really the middle class, although apparently Congress, which often earns in that range, does think that's the middle class. Who are the losers here? The United States is a loser among the community of nations because we've showed our orgiastic dysfunction politically and showed how it affects our economy in a way that's very raw and could not possibly be beneficial. In addition to which, it is ironic that we watched the party, especially the Republican Party, fight tooth and nail to keep people from a 4% increase in their taxes if they make basically between $250,000 and $450,000, but nobody cared all that much to keep the average household from seeing a $1,000 increase in their taxes vis-a-vis the payroll tax increase. And I think it's a sort of painful reminder of who butters the bread and where Congress's eyes are focused in terms of who they believe their core constituency is.
And Max, that's not even to mention the fact that the U.S. credit ratings will likely be downgraded yet again, making it more difficult for the U.S. to borrow money as a government and also also more expensive. So let me ask you this. Why did this bill fall so short? I mean, was Congress so eager to pass a bill, any bill at all, that it forgot what it was trying to accomplish in the first place?
That's quite possible. I mean, again, I think you might be better off with a psychiatrist than an economist to figure this out. What I would say is the following. The difference between the Democrat and Republican parties here is actually not very big. But they've been drinking their Kool-Aid, exaggerating this sort of small difference between them into some giant difference, which really is not fairly true. The other thing is that the Democrats really kind of promised there'd be no middle class tax increase, and there'd be no entitlement cuts. We're going to get middle income tax increases. We're also going to get entitlement cuts. And the Republicans guaranteed to their faithful there'd be no tax increase, but we got them. So it was very difficult because there are very few things they promised their various bases, Democrats and Republicans, and this deal violated all the basic promises to both basic constituencies, so nobody wanted to be responsible for a deal, and everybody was much more interested in grandstanding and talking ideological purity than solving the nation's problems. Of course, that's also how we got in to the difficult situation that we find ourselves in, still now, and certainly before the deal as well.
And Max, we knew that at some point there had to be a compromise, that not everybody was going to be happy with every part of this bill. That's something that we knew about. But you just talked about the payroll tax cuts and the end of them and why no one is talking about them. So let me ask you this. I mean, you and I and average Americans are going to be paying more, and that's just the fact of it. 77% of us are going to be paying more. So why was this expected, and why isn't Congress or anyone for that matter talking about this? Is this the thing that is just supposed to be mum on Congress's part?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. To give them the sort of benefit of the doubt here, it was an expiry of a tax cut. So what we're seeing is a 4.25% rate going back to a 6.5% rate about on the payroll tax from the employer's, the employee's responsibility. So it is actually the end of a tax cut as opposed to technically a tax hike, although it will feel like one, of around $1,100 to $1,300 for the average family. Why aren't we hearing much about it? Because they're focusing on the few successes, some real, some imagined, and that is not an area of success, and it highlights that when the Republican Party says no new taxes at all, they mean new taxes, and including new taxes for people who can't afford it. And when the Democratic Party says no new taxes for anyone making under $250,000, they mean no new taxes except for the new taxes that you now have, which are $1,300 more probably on average per year. So nobody really wants to talk about the face plant that they executed here. They want to talk about the half twist on their way down that they did, not how they landed on their face, not their feet.
And Max, I do have to bring up another point. There was a couple of interesting notes with this fiscal cliff deal. There was a couple of sweet things that slid under the radar for most people, things that you wouldn't expect to see. There was $430 million that was dedicated to Hollywood to encourage television and film production. $331 million went to railroads. $222 million went to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands for taxes collected, the excise taxes collected on the rum they produced. $70 million went to NASCAR. $59 million went to algae growers to encourage the production of this cellulosic biofuel, and $4 million in expanded tax credits went to electric motorcycle makers. So, I mean, all of those things, from what I'm hearing, they're all sweeteners. They're just meant to encourage people that were really against the fiscal cliff bill to be a little bit more open to it. Why these deals and why now? Was this really the most important thing that needed to be settled?
No, absolutely not. But I think those are great examples, and some of them quite funny. Others are sort of tragic comic. But it reminds us, we're talking about a $4 trillion budget. So the idea that there isn't really money for this or that is really another way of saying, somewhat dishonestly, you are not a priority. And the payroll tax reminds us that the average working American suffering through now really the 5th year of stagnant to negative wage growth is not a priority. And if we want to look at why, I think our debate would have to start on a political system that's auctioning off these jobs, and we'd have to revisit things like Citizens United. Until we do that, somebody's special constituent who needs an asparagus museum or needs a bridge to nowhere or needs a special excise tax rebate is going to be first and foremost for Congress, unlike working families, because that's who pays for the campaigns.
It's a really interesting point to note, and I know China and North Korea are following this story, along with other global leaders are following this story quite closely. They are actually asking the U.S. why is something not being resolved, and you know, there's a lot of other people that are wondering what kind of a precedent we're setting, being the global leader, for other countries to be able to resolve their issues. Max Rod-Wolf, Senior Analyst for Greencast Capital, thank you so much for your opinion, sir.
Thank you.